In 1975, a mother walked into a police station in Nevinnomyssk, Soviet Russia, and gave officers a name. She told them her 11-year-old son had gone into the forest to participate in a film being made by a man from his youth club. She told them the name of the club. She told them the name of the man. The officers wrote it down. They knew exactly who the man was. He had just received a formal commendation from the Communist Party. No investigation was opened. Over the next 10 years, 3 more boys from the same club would go missing. The man she named walked out of that police station with his reputation completely intact, celebrated by his community, trusted by every parent in that town, and entirely free to keep going. His name was Anatoly Slivko. By the early 1980s, Anatoly Slivko was one of the most recognizable faces in Nevinnomyssk. He ran Chergid, a youth travel club based 3 miles from his home that took boys on hiking expeditions, organized outdoor activities, and produced amateur documentary films about Soviet history. The club was popular. The waiting list was real. Parents considered it a privilege for their sons to be part of it. Slivko had not stumbled into this position. He had built it carefully over nearly 2 decades. He was elected deputy of the city council in 1977. He held the title of Honored Teacher of the Soviet Union, one of the most prestigious recognitions an educator could receive in the country. The Communist Party had commended him multiple times. Local newspapers had printed features on the club's work. Soviet radio had interviewed him. He was 44 years old, married with 2 sons, and regarded by nearly everyone who knew him as a warm, reliable, community-minded man. None of that was invented. The expeditions were real. The films were made. The boys who came to Chergid had genuine experiences that many of them valued long into adulthood. The public version of Anatoly Slivko was not a costume placed over nothing. It was a real life, built with real effort over real years, inside which something else was quietly taking place. Where it started. A street in Nevinnomyssk, 1961. The event that appears in every account of this case happened in 1961, when Slivko was 23 years old. A drunk motorcyclist lost control of his vehicle on a street in Nevinnomyssk and struck a group of pedestrians. A teenage boy wearing the uniform of the Young Pioneers, the Soviet youth organization, broadly equivalent to the Boy Scouts, was critically hurt. He went into convulsions on the pavement. There was fuel from the wreckage. There was fire. Most of the witnesses moved away. Slivko stayed and watched. He described what he felt in that moment years later, during his confession. The uniform, the convulsions, the smell of burning fuel. He said he experienced an immediate, overwhelming response he could not explain, a desire to cause the same kind of harm to a boy in the same uniform. He said he had never felt anything like it before, and had no framework for understanding what had just happened to him. In 1961, Soviet Russia, there was no public language for what he was describing. No clinic, no book, no conversation he could have. He went home. He told no one. Within months, he had set up his first youth club. The first club ended in fire. Accounts suggest it was set deliberately by one of the boys who attended. No charges were brought. No explanation was ever given publicly. Slivko moved on quickly and built a second one, which he named Chergid. It would operate for the next 2 decades. Understanding what Chergid actually was requires holding 2 things in mind at the same time, because both were true. The club's activities were real. The hiking trips happened. The films were made. The expeditions into the mountains of the North Caucasus were genuine, physically demanding, and valued by the boys who went on them. Slivko was not pretending to care about what he was building. He put in consistent hours over years. He was a capable organizer. Some of the boys who passed through Chergid maintained a connection to him long into adulthood, with no idea of what else had been happening around them. What the club also gave him was something specific: uninterrupted access to boys between 11 and 17, whose families trusted him, without question, in a setting where his authority was total and his instructions were followed without hesitation. From 1963, he began using that access. The selection was always the same: a boy who was short for his age, a boy who was willing to wear the young pioneer's uniform, the same uniform the boy in the 1961 accident had been wearing. A boy Slivko had already been building a relationship with for weeks or months through the normal activities of the club. Never a stranger. The story he gave each boy varied slightly. Sometimes he described a technique involving controlled suspension that would stretch the spine and help the boy grow taller. Other times he described it as a study into what happens to the body when the air supply is briefly limited, a scientific experiment that needed willing participants. The framing changed. The structure never did. Before each session, the boy was told not to eat for a few hours. Slivko would provide a clean, pressed young pioneer's uniform for the boy to wear. He prepared it himself, pressed it himself, cleaned the shoes himself. This preparation was identical every time, across more than 20 years. During the session, the boy was placed under a controlled restraint until he became unresponsive. While the boy was in that state, Slivko carried out the harm and filmed and photographed the entire session. Afterwards, he revived the boy. The boy woke up with no memory of what had happened. Slivko told him that disorientation was a normal side effect of the process. He then asked the boy to keep the session between them, explaining that the technique had not yet received official approval and needed to stay private. The boys agreed. They trusted him. Between 1963 and 1985, Slivko conducted this with 43 boys. In 36 cases, he revived them, and they went home unaware of what had occurred during their unresponsive state. The photographs and films were developed in a locked darkroom at Chergid and kept in a carefully maintained archive. In 7 cases, Slivko did not revive them. The first incident happened on June 2nd, 1964. The boy was 15-year-old Nikolai Dobryshev, a teenager living away from home without strong family ties, the kind of disappearance that could easily be explained away. Slivko later said he had not intended the outcome, that he had tried to revive Dobryshev and failed. Whether that is true cannot be established. What the record confirms is that afterwards, Slivko disposed of the remains, destroyed the evidence using fire, and concealed what remained in woodland outside Nevinnomyssk. He then destroyed the film and photographs from that session. He destroyed the records from his first case. He kept everything from every case that followed. A second incident occurred in May 1965, another boy. The same pattern, the same forest. Alexei Kovalenko did not survive. The same method of concealment was used. When his family reported him missing, police concluded he had run away. No further action was taken. After Kovalenko, Slivko paused the irreversible incidents for 8 years. The sessions with other boys continued throughout that period, roughly once or twice a year. He kept developing the films, maintaining the archive, attending city events, collecting commendations. The pause applied only to the cases that ended without revival. In November 1973, that pause ended. The third incident happened on November 14, 1973. Alexander Nesmeyanov was 15, a Chergid member who had spent a lot of time with Slivko in the weeks before he vanished. When police investigated, Slivko made himself central to the search-printed missing person leaflets, organized volunteer groups, coordinated with neighbors. He made sure those groups never went near the locations he knew about. He sat with worried parents. He expressed concern. He was interviewed as a community figure doing everything he could. He was not a suspect. Nesmyanov was never found. May 11th, 1975. An 11-year-old named Andrei Pogasyan told a neighbor he was heading into the forest to help with a film. He did not come back. His mother went directly to the police and gave them a name, Slivko's name. She was specific. She told them about the forest, the film, the club, the pattern. Officers logged the information. They knew who Slivko was. He had awards. He had just received a party commendation. The idea that this particular man could be involved was, in that town at that time, simply too inconsistent with everything they had been told about him. No investigation was opened. The case went cold. That decision to log the name and move on would remain open for the next decade. After 1975, 3 more boys from Chergid would go missing before this case was finally closed. Sergei Fatsyev, in 1980, 13 years old. Another club member, another forest, another dead end in the records. Vyacheslav Kovistik, in 1984, 15 years old. The same pattern repeated so precisely, it was almost mechanical. Each disappearance was filed. Each one was treated as its own isolated incident. Nobody pulled the thread that connected all of them. And then, on July 23rd, 1985, Sergei Pavlov, age 13, the last one. He told a neighbor before he left that he was going to meet the Chergid leader to film a home movie. He left in the afternoon. He did not come home. And this time, unlike every time before, the people around him would not stop asking questions. Prosecutor Tamara Langieva was assigned to the Pavlov case in late 1985, without any expectation of where it would lead. Another missing boy in a town that had seen several of them. She visited the club, reviewed what records existed, and found nothing obviously wrong. Chergid looked like exactly what it was supposed to be, but she kept interviewing the boys. Across separate conversations, boys who had no knowledge of what anyone else was telling her, the same things came up repeatedly. An experiment. A process Slivko described as working on the spine. Gaps in their memory they could not explain. Coming around not knowing how much time had passed. The phrase, temporary amnesia, appeared in account after account. No individual account was proof of anything. Each one, looked at alone, described something strange but explainable. The experiment had been designed to sound medical. The boy had agreed. Slivko had revived him. Langieva did not look at the accounts alone. She placed them side by side. Then she laid them against the list of boys who had gone missing, everyone a Chergid member. Everyone last seen, heading toward something connected to Slivko. She requested authorization to search the club. It came through in December 1985. Officers searched Slivko's home in Stavropol first. They went through every room. They found what you would expect to find in the home of a respected family man: furniture, paperwork, the ordinary contents of a household. He had been deliberate about keeping his 2 lives completely separate. Chergid told a different story. The darkroom at the club was locked. When officers opened it, what they found inside stopped the search completely. Shelf after shelf of developed photographs, dozens of film reels, restraint equipment and tubing stored neatly alongside bladed tools and implements, and in one section a collection of boys' shoes. Every pair carefully preserved. Every pair cut through at the midfoot in a way that was clearly intentional, clearly repeated, and clearly meaningful to the person who had done it. This was not evidence of something that had gone wrong once. The organization of it, the care taken with storage, the labeling, the sheer volume pointed to someone who had been maintaining this space for a very long time. The archive confirmed it. Every session since 1963 was documented. Photographs from each one, film footage from each one, the boys in an unresponsive state, the sessions that had not ended in revival, more than 2 decades of deliberate, uninterrupted record-keeping. He had destroyed material from only one case in 22 years, the first, in 1964. Everything after that was still there. Slivko was arrested at his Stavropol home that same day. On December 28, 1985, his 47th birthday, he began to confess. The confession was methodical. He walked through each of the 7 irreversible incidents with the same careful precision he had apparently used while carrying them out. Investigators noted he showed no visible distress. He was not looking for sympathy. He described what he had done in the same tone someone might use to describe the logistics of a completed project. He pointed to the 1961 accident as the starting point. He said he had never understood why witnessing it produced the response it did. He said he had never had any way to seek help. He said he could not explain it and could not stop it. In early 1986, he led investigators to forest locations outside Nevinnomyssk and showed them where he had concealed the remains of 6 of his 7 confirmed cases. The remains of Nezmayanov and Pogashin were confirmed at the sites he identified. The same forest where Chergid had conducted legitimate outdoor expeditions for 2 decades. He could not locate the remains of Nikolai Dobryshev, his first case from 1964. Those remains were never recovered. The courtroom in Nevinnomyssk had seen difficult cases before. It had not seen anything like this. Slivko entered a not guilty plea. His position throughout the trial was consistent. All 7 tragic outcomes had been accidental. Timing errors he had not intended. Situations that went further than he had planned. The prosecution responded by playing the footage. The documentation he had personally kept, organized, and stored for 22 years made the accidental version of events impossible to sustain. The court returned guilty verdicts on every count. Under Soviet law, the sentence handed down required sign-off from the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet before it could be carried out. Slivko was transferred to Novocherkassk prison and placed in a separate unit to wait. That process would take 3 years. In 1989, while awaiting the final verdict, Slivko was consulted by investigators working on an unrelated case in the Rostov Oblast. An unknown individual responsible for at least 29 documented incidents against vulnerable individuals that had not yet been resolved. The reasoning was straightforward. Slivko had operated undetected inside a trusting community for 22 years. If anyone understood how that was possible, it was him. Procurator Isa Kostoyev led the sessions. Slivko cooperated fully. His observations about how community trust functions as protection were considered and specific. His practical advice on profiling the unknown Rostov individual turned out to be largely inaccurate. The individual was Andrei Chikatilo, arrested in 1990, whose profile differed significantly from Slivko's own. Slivko never learned the outcome. On September 16, 1989, hours after his final interview with Kostoyev ended, the final sentence was administered by the state at Novocherkassk prison. He was 50 years old. The clearest moment of institutional failure in this case was 1975. A mother named Slivko directly gave a specific account and provided enough detail for an investigation to begin. The officers who received that complaint knew who Slivko was. He was celebrated. He had just received a party commendation. They did not investigate. Between that moment and Slivko's arrest in December 1985, 4 more boys did not come home. No formal consequences were ever recorded for the officers involved. This case gets studied not because it is the worst of its kind, but because it illustrates something that comes up across cases like this, in different countries, in different eras. Institutions find it extremely difficult to investigate someone they have publicly celebrated. Every commendation, every newspaper feature, every award Slivko received created a form of official endorsement. To investigate him was to question everyone who had praised him. That is not a process that moves quickly. And, in this case, it did not move at all, until one prosecutor decided to keep asking questions. The trust Slivko had was not foolishly given. It was earned. The expeditions were real. The relationships were real. The outcomes for many of the boys who passed through Chergid were genuinely positive. That is exactly what makes this kind of situation so difficult to see from the outside, and so damaging once it comes apart. 36 boys walked out of Chergid sessions and went home without any idea of what had happened to them in their unresponsive state. They grew up. They built lives. For years or decades, some of them carried the memory of what they believed had been a medical experiment. When the case became public after the 1986 trial, those survivors found themselves connected without warning, without preparation to something they had not known existed. The Soviet Union in 1986 had no support structure for that. No specialist services, no recognized legal process, no public conversation. Most of them did not speak then. Most have not spoken since. The forest outside Nevinnomyssk still stands. A complaint was made in 1975. A name was given. A specific account was provided. It was not acted on. One prosecutor who kept asking, and one mother who refused to accept the word runaway, brought 22 years to an end. If this gave you something to think about, share it. Subscribe for a new, carefully researched true crime documentary every week. Some of the most important questions in cases like this aren't about the person who caused the harm. They're about the systems that kept looking the other way.